Squarespace grids. It just might be their killer feature. I know it seems like a simple thing, and I'm going to show you in this video two things. One, where are the grids? How do you adjust them? What do they really do? How does it work? There are dozens of videos on Squarespace now that are about 2 minutes long that will do that for you. But not just how do you make the adjustments, why, and what do the adjustments do? We're going to break into that because I think that's where the rubber really hits the road here. So strap in. I'm going to switch over to my browser window and I'm going to show you on a site exactly how I think about and manage all of these different spacings and grids and layouts in Squarespace. Here we go. We just got a basic website up. And this is just from a template in their template store. I've made a bunch of adjustments to it because I've made some YouTube videos banging on this one a little bit. And I think this is a good example of what we're looking at. So this is just a home page. We're going to make another page in a minute. I'm going to hit the edit button in the top here. And first things first, if you hit G on your keyboard, it will turn the visual of the grids on or off. G again. It's a great way to see where the grids are at because grids, sneaky, are section level. They're not site wide. So if I make an adjustment to the grid system or the grid layout in this gray section here, it will not affect the section above and below. You're also seeing no margin here in this section, and I'm going to show you how to manage that in just a second. But in general, I'm going to turn it off. When you click on a section and you start dragging an object around, Squarespace is going to show you the grid until you let it go or click off of it, and then the grid goes away. So they're being helpful here and allowing us to see where we want to drag this so we can align objects. Like say if I wanted to align these two boxes of text next to each other on a grid row, when I drag it, you can see how that's happening there. It's a great way to kind of see how you want to line things up and what the spacing will be and where it falls in the grid. And the grid size in this section is the default size for grids. Now, if you click on a section, you get this modal over here on the right. It says edit section. I'm going to click on that. And you can see right here it says grid. And we've got a grid number. That's the number of rows, the row count. And then we've got our gap sizing. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit so you can see the top and the bottom. Now, when I hit grid, the row count, you can see the bottom moved on me. So let me scroll so you can really see that. You can add and remove rows by simply clicking on that, or you can also just type in a number. Another thing you can do before I move on here, I'm going to click out of this and close it. This handlebar, this blue handlebar here, you can drag this around and just start adding rows and removing rows. And sneaky, if you find yourself like, oh, I've got a ton of rows in here and I don't want to have to keep scrolling, move it, and keep scrolling and move it. If you double click this, it will automatically compress down to the total height of the contents of that section. Sneaky, good time saver there. Now, I'm going to hit G and turn my grid on and go back to edit section because there's a couple things I want to show you here. And you can see how these things behave. So if I hit this button right here that has no space between the boxes in that grid, you can see how now there is no space in the grid. And then if I click back to the default, you can see the spaces are back in the grid. This is also completely customizable by hitting this ellipses here that I just clicked on. And then you can control the space between the grid blocks vertically and horizontally. So you can really have a wild grid here. And there are use cases, especially if you have overlapping content elements, which I'm going to show you a little bit of here in a minute. The default is 11 and 11. And that's because you always have the total number of grid columns is always the same. And as far as the total width on this goes, I'm going to hit save and show you two more things that are just sort of basic features. If I hit the paintbrush and go to my site styles, Down at the bottom, it says miscellaneous. If I click on that and I go to spacing here in the middle, I know it doesn't, the naming here doesn't make a lot of sense, but if I hit spacing, you could see that the total width and the site margin are set to a specific size. Now, if I make the total width wider, you can see the contents of the page scale with it, or they span with it, because the rows are moving. I mean, the columns are moving. The same thing with site margin. It's going to affect mostly like spacing around the whole site. It can be hard to see and illustrate that, but if I increase this total width to 1270 and hit back and close and hit save, because we have contents locked up both on the edge of the browser window and also against the edge, let me hit G, of the grid. So if the total width moves, then the side that they're abut to will move, then the whole object moves. And because we started squishing and moving our grid around, some of the things resized, that's okay. Make this a little taller, and then move this back down. Now, you can see what's a little different here on this site. Your website's probably a little bit different in that you have margin inside of your sections. Let me show you where that comes from. So hit save and exit, and let's create a new page and start from blank. Or we'll create an about page here, okay? And because I want to work with a white page here. This is probably closer. That other page is super creative and colorful. Your page is probably more like this. So if I'm going to hit edit, and you can see when I hit G, there's margin space now on the top and the bottom of these sections. But there are different amounts of margin space here. You've got a small amount here, and this would be a large amount, I think, anyway. That's controllable in any section on the website. And it is also, like the grid size, like the spacing in the grids, section specific and will not affect other sections on the site or on this page. So if I hit edit section, you can see here it says section. You got full screen, which means it's going to stretch out to be the full width of that screen. And then you've got the height, small, medium, and large. And you can see how that gap, right, that margin space, you can't drag an object above that row. You can drag it to the edge, but you can't drag it above the row of grids. It's sort of blocked off. So if you need to create a design, and I'll show you in a second, where things abut or overlook or look like they're overlapping, even if they're in different sections, this screen height, this is where that happens. One other thing I'll show you here is alignment, where you can, the sections are always aligned in the middle, like sort of vertically height adjusted middle, but you can also lean them toward the top or the bottom. And when you do that, you have more margin space on the bottom here than you have at the top. You can see that. And the same thing if I hit this button, more on the top than on the bottom. And that can help if you have different sections, but you want those sections to look like they're one thing, because maybe they're one block of content sort of away. So, and there's a good use case for that. A lot of times you want to keep the total number of content elements inside of a section pretty low, because when you switch over to edit in mobile, you have more stuff to drag around, and it's difficult to drag stuff that's out of my view here above and below other things. So I typically try to keep the number of content blocks or sections inside of a section low, like as few as possible. More sections is better for editing in mobile than having few sections with lots of content blocks inside of them. That's just sort of a tip there. So let me do a thing here where I show you how to leverage these sections and how I think about them sometimes. So if I have overlapping objects, so I want to move that, I'm going to move this here. And that text is way too big. I will quadruple click that and make it H4. Just for the case of this example, just for this particular use case. And let me double click here. And you can see I've got margin in this section and more margin in this section. I think it's set to large. Change it to medium. So when we adjust our grid, the overlap of these things, like I was showing you a second ago, will change. So oftentimes I won't adjust the horizontal all that often because there aren't a lot of wins to be gained there. But the height one there certainly are. If we want that text to be tighter and we want this text, that photo to be under this title, then I can adjust that down and hit the move backwards. And now we have a pretty cool overlay. You think about classic advertising and how magazine design, newspaper design, advertising that was in print, like, you know, billboards or bus stop ads and things like that. Objects can touch and realign with one another with groupings. And this really helps with visual depth, but also it helps with emphasis to make sure that when we have things that are grouped together, you have the opportunity to have real concise pieces of content or information inside of an ad, or in this case, a website. So when they touch and they're aligned like this, it is in a more obvious grouping. Like sometimes you want a lot of negative space and sometimes you don't need a lot of negative space. You want elements to touch one another. And that can be difficult when the grid is full size. So oftentimes that's something I'll do, because if this is, say, a default grid, right? We'll just put this on default. And I move this under it, that can work, but it may not always be to the pixel as close or as far away or as much overlap or overlay that I want. Now, the next thing I want to show you is what looks like object bleed or object overlap inside of two different sections. So I'm going to take a section here, this header section, because these sections have no margin, right? Full screen's turned off, which means, let me hit G, that the first and the last row of a section but the end of that section. And something that you can do here, if you wanted this to overlap or appear overlapped, is to make this text say in the palette. That's a crap. I want to go with bright yellow, green, because I want to show you something here. Okay, so if I add a block that is a shape and it is touching the bottom or abutting the bottom of that section, and I move it to the edges, right? And this can take a couple of drags because Squarespace is cautious not to go all the way to the edge. And I move it to the back and I make this blue by clicking the pencil and the shape color, the styling. Make this gray, and I'm going to make this section color gray as well. Turn off my grid, and you can see this looks like it's one kind of section here. And let me move this up so the text is only half overlapping that. Hit save and exit. And you can see how the text starts to overlap. This happens a lot with different images where you may want an image to appear like it's bleeding from one section to the next. I'm going back to the About page. I want to show you a more practical execution of this. So say this section, right, was gray. And we have no margin gap, and we have no, and it's not set to full screen. I'm going to grab this text and move it down, but we want this top of this image to feel like it's in this first section. I can put a shape block here. I went too far, and have it spread out and spanned just like we did before, and move it to the back. And then this helps accomplish that. So if this section above also is not full screen, and these images are flush to the bottom, then even though we're in two different sections, we have content that feels like it's touching one another. And that's what I mean by tighter execution. Sometimes because you don't stray too far from the gap, between sections by editing or customizing the grid or the gapping, the margin space inside of a section, you feel like you're stuck with all of this enormous amount of negative white space between sections. And one part of really mastering the grid system is realizing that you don't have to be stuck there, that it's totally editable, and you can have objects touching one another or even appearing to overlap, even though they're in different sections. So that was kind of one of the major tricks that I wanted to share here with you. I hope that this was helpful and that I hit on the points you were kind of curious about, and maybe found some creative ways to use sections and grids in a way that creates really engaging website design inside of Squarespace. So I'll see you in the next one. Listen, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And if you have questions or comments, you want to leave them below. I try to answer those. So I hope you have a great one and have fun in there.